For me, one of the reasons I was asking about the elevation, and I did go out and visit the location, wanted to get a feel for it firsthand. I do recognize the need for senior housing, and doing infill projects like this are very difficult. It's tough to get something into a lot like this. Some people think it's very easy, but it is not easy. But the elevation aspect was critical for me, and I wanted to take into account the things that were said today, especially from the residents around the area. So this project is looking at 38.5 feet, and I'm looking at the apartments directly to the south and the others, and that was kind of a focal point for me, to be honest, in relation to those couple of residents along Buena Vista. And 8.5 feet may not seem like a lot, but making it a third story over the buildings to the south, which are 2-story, for me, that's just too big of a building to go in there. I'd have been comfortable, I think, with a 2-story going in, but the third story just makes it a little bit too large for me. Again, senior housing is needed, but that's where I'm standing.
I'll wrap up with, I understand this is transitional neighborhood, and I absolutely, and you've heard me always say, is that senior and low-income housing is something that we have a shortage in our community. But I also am very strong that we have to have a project that we're going to be proud of, and not one that looks like we just kind of shoved in behind. And I did talk to Mr. Saunders about this yesterday. We have one chance to make it look right. And I have to agree that those homes will be in there. And I do understand also you've had vacant lot for a very long time. My daughter's lived over in those apartments for a couple years, just recently moved out, so I'm very familiar with this area. I just think that if we need to step back and take the time, and I would hope that the applicant would consider at least purchasing one or trying to purchase the homes to make it look like a project, not something we shove there. I agree that in a few years from now that we want to be able to be proud of that neighborhood and not look like we just shoved something there. You know, all the other things we can look and do, but the fact that you're building around other homes has a real issue for me. Mr. Montanez.
One of the things that was mentioned was the fact that this is a transitional area. None of those apartments that are in that area have been built in recent time. None of them have been built while any of us were on the city council or even on the planning commission. So those have been there. I think Joanne or somebody mentioned at least from the 80s. I think Mr. Flores had mentioned that also. And I think what really needs to be done is a study of that area and get some of the property owners together, have them meet amongst themselves, and come up with a plan for that area. I know across the street of Buena Vista, there is at least one property owner that had looked to join their property back over to where the mobile home park was, and they were not allowed to at one point, that there might be a whole lot more cohesiveness if it were done as a project area as opposed to just piecemeal like was allowed to happen with the apartment buildings that are there now. So I think although we need senior housing, although that area probably could do with more housing in that area, you know, does Buena Vista need to be widened? What else can be done in that area? I think that whole area needs to be studied and then come back at some point in the future with an actual plan of what the neighborhood could look like. I think it could be made to look much nicer if it were done as a cohesive development.
When you're talking about that, Mr. Montanez, are you talking about this particular project to kind of step back and see what else he could do rather than moving
Well,
forward?
and I'm not sure it's just this project. I think that whole area, there are other, if you look at some of those aerial shots, there are other large lots, there are other areas that are vacant that are almost landlocked behind homes. I mean, if you look at Google Maps, some of those lots are so large, people have cars stored in the back. You don't even see that from the street because the lots are so deep. So I think there is an advantage of doing a Google Map look, get a aerial survey, and actually see what's being done on some of those lots. And if they are underutilized, then maybe there is a way that the property owners could be all come together and come to something that would be good for the property owners and then also good for the neighbors.
Okay, so with Mr. Neary's project, I mean, I'm open if he's looking at, checking out those two houses. And I know the challenge is you want the land and not the houses, and it costs more money for that. I understand that. Just that we're going to have to live with this as a community in perpetuity. So I'm just kind of asking Mr. Saunders, what does your client want to do on this?
I don't think we can continue the item because if the goal is to make, even on his project, if we did his project in and of itself by itself in the future, it would still have to come back and be public, have another public hearing for a different size lot if that were the case. So I don't know. Oh, now Mr. Saunders is getting up.